Hey, what's up? My name's Cameron Doherty, and I have been on a mission lately to find the best low-profile mechanical keyboard. And on that journey, you cannot help but find the brand Keychron. They're one of the biggest names in low-profile mechanicals, and they have a wide array of offerings. Today, I'm taking a look at the Keychron K3, which is their 75% version, but a lot of what I have to say is going to apply across the entire line. So what we're going to do is talk through the fundamentals of the Keychron's lineup. We're going to talk about the unique features that make them special, a few of the problems and concerns that I've found with my keyboard, and then ultimately wrap it up with who this keyboard is for and who I think should buy this. So let's jump right in and talk about the fundamentals. Keychron has a huge array of offerings. They have tons in the full-size mechanical keyboard space, but they also have the biggest lineup I'm aware of in the low-profile mechanical keyboards. You can go everywhere from a 65% all the way up to a 100% keyboard. And for me, the 75% is the sweet spot. This is where I tend to gravitate on most of my keyboards these days. And it's because you get the full function row, you still have home and page up, page down, full size arrow keys. You get all of the essential keys without any sacrifices. For me, the only thing that's lost is a 10 key, but I'll take the compact size for that trade-off. And on top of that, one of the best things I think about a 75% layout specifically is that it most closely mirrors what you're going to get on most laptops. So if you're flipping back and forth between typing on a laptop and typing at your desk, this is going to be the closest way to keep them kind of parallel, where you're not going to be completely having to relearn your muscle memory every time you switch from one to the other. So taking a closer look at this specific K3 model, the overall construction is very solid. There's an aluminum top plate that goes around that's a beautiful black, and it's on the very thin side, I would say. So there is a little bit of board flex that comes into play, but overall what you're getting instead is thin and light. And when you're talking about a low profile mechanical keyboard, thin and light tends to be one of the bigger priorities over having something truly solid and rigid. And so in that case, this is a great setup and great construction. On the bottom, there is ABS plastic with some rubberized feet and some extendable feet to give you both a 6-degree and 9-degree angle for typing. On the back, there are two switches to switch between off, Bluetooth, and a wired USB mode, as well as switching between Mac or iOS and Windows or Android. There is a USB-C port, which is interestingly located in the middle, which is the only keyboard that I'm aware of that I've seen that does it that way. I'm much more used to seeing it on one side or the other. So if you're somebody that likes to keep it wired, or if you want to have a coiled cable to give yourself a unique look, just bear that in mind when you're designing your setup, that it would be coming out of the middle rather than one of the sides. Otherwise, the keyboard, as I mentioned, does incorporate both Mac and Windows, and the keys that are provided, the keycaps, have just one or the other, and they give you both so you can swap out to whichever one that you're looking for. Speaking of these keycaps, they are ABS plastic rather than PBT, and that just means that they're a little bit cheaper and you will get a little bit of shine over time. I've been using this semi-regularly for the last 6 months as I've been testing other keyboards, so I've used this off and on, and there's not too much shine, but you can definitely tell that it's not quite the same as when it arrived. So as with any ABS keycaps, you're going to get that shine, and I think it's totally fine. It's just something that comes with the territory. Luckily, you can always replace them, get a new set if you want to, and you don't have to replace the whole keyboard since they're switches that can easily be pulled off. Now, below the keycaps, there are two different versions of switches that you can get with this keyboard. You can either get Gateron Low Profile mechanical switches or a Keychron specific optical switch. And only those Keychron ones are hot swappable, so keep that in mind if you ever intend to swap out switches or just want to make sure that you have that option available to you in the event that one of your switches dies and you don't really want to get into doing any surgery to your keyboard. So I went with the optical switches, and they do come in standard blue, red, and brown. I went with brown, which is where I tend to land. I like the tactile feel, and I like the sound that a brown switch makes. Included within the switches are backlighting, which there's also options here. So there is a full RGB, which is what I elected to go with. There's also a version that has just white backlights, and there's even a sort of cheaper version that comes with white keycaps and has no backlighting at all. Obviously, when you're using the backlighting, you're going to drain your battery much more quickly, so it's always a trade-off and something to consider. But it's nice to give you the option when you have the RGB to stick with a white light or get more adventurous if you want to show off some colors and some personality with your keyboard. Now, that battery I'm talking about is a 1550 milliamp hour battery, and that's a good bit smaller than most of the other competitors in the slim mechanical that I'm aware of their battery size. I know that there are some in the 2000 and some in the 2500 milliamp hour range, and that kind of aligns with my experience. This keyboard did die a little bit more quickly than many of my others, and it wasn't to the point of unusability, but you definitely want to keep in mind that this would go very well if you're doing wired, and if you're wanting to do wireless. If you can manage to keep that backlighting off, you'll definitely get longer battery life. But if you're somebody that likes to have the light on frequently, you're gonna have to charge it pretty regularly. So make sure that you keep that in mind in terms of how you expect to use it. And finally, all of this comes in at just under $100. And I'll talk more about the options and the challenges that that presents later on. But you do have to consider that pricing will change dramatically, or can change to various different numbers based on which options you choose. So whether you want the hot swappable switches or the regular mechanical switches, whether you want the RGB or the white backlighting, etc., are going to impact your price. All in for this, I spent about $95, and that was including shipping. And since these are coming from Hong Kong, most of the time you do have to pay for shipping. Depending on where you are in the world, that might vary greatly. But it's definitely something worth pricing out based on where you want to get this keyboard and what you're willing to pay. But all in all, this is on the cheaper side at just under $100 for a really solid mechanical keyboard. So now that we've discussed all of the fundamentals, let's get into the cool things, the unique features, the stuff that makes this special. Let's talk about those. So the first thing that makes the Keychron K3 special is that it's just plain tiny. I've looked at a lot of low profile mechanical keyboards, and this is by far the smallest one. It's extremely short in terms of its height, and even when you have it at the highest level, it just feels very small on your desk. It's light, it's tiny, the keys are small, everything on it looks very small, and that makes it really cool and really unique because if you're shopping for a low profile mechanical keyboard, then you're looking for something small and low profile, and this hits the nail on the head in terms of that. Now, on top of that, the keys, based on the fact that they are small, you can see there's kind of gaps in between the keys. They're not like a lot of other keyboards where you'll see those keys going right up against each other. Visually, it depends on your taste, whether you like the looks of this or whether you don't like the looks of this. But one thing that I found practically with it is that I didn't have as many misclicks as usual. So where I would normally be in between two keys and have trouble getting from one to the other, there's something about having that sizable gap in between the keys that actually helped me to type more reliably and make sure that I was hitting the right key every time. So even though it might not be the best thing visually, it is something that I found functionally was beneficial to my typing experience. On top of that, with the visuals, I really love this orange accent key, and they actually ship you with two of them, both the escape key and also this RGB key that we'll talk about more in my concerns section. And so you can have two orange keys and you can do one on either side, or they also send you non-orange keys if you want to just keep it as a pretty clean looking gray and black setup. I think that this could sit on pretty much any professional's desk and blend right in, but then with a little pop of that orange color to have that Keychron branding, it's available there if you want it. And for me, I like it. The next thing that makes this keyboard unique and that makes every keyboard unique is its sound. And so let's do a quick listen and sound test of what the keyboard sounds like. So as you could probably hear, the sound is relatively quiet. It's a little bit muted. It's a little bit softer than what I've heard on other low profile mechanical keyboards. And that can be a good thing for sure, but the sound is a little bit off from my expectations. And so you could probably hear that it's slightly clickier than most brown switches. And it depends on what you think. Actually, my wife described it as fun and different when she was comparing it to several other similar keyboards. And I think that's pretty accurate. It's definitely a different sound compared to a competitor version with brown switches. And it's up to you whether you like that, whether it's a favorable difference, or whether that's gonna be a little bit annoying. The fact that it sounds a little bit more like a blue sort of clicky switch kind of bothers me a little bit, but it gets washed out by the fact that it's nice and quiet, and so I don't really hear it that much. The only other thing to take note here is that there's some variability across the different keys, and for whatever reason, I find that the keys towards the top are a little bit quieter than the ones in the bottom. And that might just be the fact that the case sort of tapers down, and so if there's some sort of insulating foam inside, there might just be more of it at the top than there is at the bottom. It could be as simple as that. But the most dramatic point in that is the space bar, and you probably heard that in my key test that the space bar is very loud. And so even though the overall keys are very quiet, if you're somebody that slams on that space bar, you're gonna hear it, and that one's gonna stand out amongst all the rest. So all in all, I think it's a pretty good sound. It's different than a lot of others, and it might be right for you or it might not. So the third and final thing to highlight here is what makes it unique and special are the combination of the options that are available and the pricing. And so when you're buying a Keychron low profile mechanical keyboard, you have a lot of things to choose from, and you can really create the keyboard that you want specifically. You don't have to just go with what's available. And that means that you can get the different switch types of either the Gateron mechanical or the Keychron optical switch that's hot swappable. You can decide on the regular decision around blue, brown, or red switch types of what types of sound you want. Then you get to decide on backlighting, which is deciding between the RGB, the white light, or no light. And all of that you can then multiply by the various number of form factors that you can get, whether you want the K3 like I have, which is the 75% version, or whether you want a full size. All of these things translate across their whole lineup. And that amount of flexibility and that amount of tailoring to what you want is something totally unique to Keychron that I don't know of any other manufacturer that gives you that amount of flexibility and control. And then on top of that, the fact that this is pretty much the cheapest low profile mechanical keyboard that I'm aware of. Obviously, I'm sure you can find some that claim that they are and may or may not be of quality, but for a manufacturer that has proven themselves reputable over many years, Keychron can offer you a really quality product and something that should be very reliable for the cheapest price in the lineup. And so I know of ones that go up as high as around $170 in this area, and this is coming in at just under $100. And so for me, that's a value that you can't beat when it comes to low profile mechanical keyboards. And so if you're trying to keep it within your budget, you're not going to be disappointed in this case because it's definitely quality and it is cheaper than the rest. Okay, so now that I've given you all the reasons to buy the Keychron keyboard, I want to give you some words of caution, some of the problems and concerns that come to mind for me that I want to make sure that you're aware of before you make your purchasing decision. And the first thing is the keys. And so I've talked about a lot of positive things about the keys, but there's one thing that for me is a distinct negative and something that makes it a bit more challenging to type on this keyboard. And I referenced to it earlier, but I want to talk in a little bit more detail. And that's the angle of the keycaps themselves. And so the entire keyboard has a tapered look to it, but then the keys are kind of tapered back the other way. And so what that means is that when you're typing, whereas you would expect the keys to sort of face you, they now feel, whether they do or not, they feel like they're kind of forced away from you. They feel like they're something that you're having to reach back, and it feels not ergonomic. It feels a little bit just strange. this was another thing my wife pointed out, and she said, why are they slanted that way? And so this is something that I think is unique here, and if you like it, great. But for me, just visually looking at it, I'm expecting the keys to be more sort of almost presenting themselves to you, angled towards you. And when they feel either neutral or slanted back, it feels much more strange to type. And so that's the first concern for me, is that makes it a little bit more challenging to type on. But unfortunately, the concerns get a little bit worse as we go here. And so the next one is around the RGB, and there's multiple ways that companies do RGB controls, and it can either be through software, which is probably my least favorite method because you need to have a piece of software installed on your computer to make it work right. In the case of Keychron, they have the controls built into the device itself, but they're hidden as kind of function combined with plus minus or arrow keys or different things like that. And they're combinations that you're going to have to learn if you ever want to change, or you're going to have to look in the manual or look online every time you want to make an adjustment to the speed of your RGB effect. Now for me, this is not ideal, and this is something that is challenging, but you can ultimately live with. But the thing that I struggle even more with around the RGB is the placement of this RGB mode button in the top right corner. And so this is something that you should really look out for and think about, because one thing that I'm used to is having that top right corner actually be the delete key. Now theirs is just to the left of it, but for me, whether it was intentionally or unintentionally, I hit that RGB effect key many times during typing. And there's a learning curve, obviously, if you're coming from a keyboard where that is the delete key, where you need to sort of retrain yourself. But then even from that point forward, I still made some mistakes after I seemingly had learned it. And what that means is that if you change off of your preferred lighting scheme, you either need to just turn it off, or you need to cycle through the 14 or 15 different types of RGB that are available to get back to the one that you want to see. And so that's something that has just been an annoyance to me, because I'm typing along with the RGB look that I like, and all of a sudden it switches to some crazy blinking, flashing thing that I can't work with, and I have to now stop whatever I'm doing and specifically fix that, or just turn off RGB and backlighting altogether. So that's something that's super annoying in terms of usability and in terms of typing experience. But once again, the worst is yet to come, because the biggest single thing that I've dealt with this keyboard is the reconnection delay. So it seems like the keyboard disconnects around 10 minutes or so of idle time. And when it needs to reconnect, it's natural for you to not have the first key press register, but you expect it to be snappy and reconnect pretty quickly. But the Keychron's delay between when you try to reinitiate it and when it actually is communicating to the computer successfully is substantially longer than any other keyboard I've ever used. And it's extremely frustrating for me, and it really showed me just how often in my day I go from not typing for 10 minutes to suddenly typing. It could be as simple as I'm proofreading an email, or something happens where I'm just using my mouse for a period of time. That amounts to 10 minutes. I go back to my email to make a change. I try to make a change, and it takes what feels like forever for it to reconnect. Now, there's ways to fix this. You can obviously operate in a wired mode where this goes away altogether. So moot point, don't worry about it if you're somebody that's going to operate with it wired. There is also apparently a way in the hidden function commands to turn this feature off. Now, it's not something that I got a chance to test, but it obviously should be something that would fix that. However, if you're never going to sleep, you're going to wind up with huge battery loss, because then it's going to remain 100% fully connected for the entire time that it's on. And if you forget to turn it off at any time, you're going to come back to a dead keyboard pretty much every single time. So those options aren't great. And if you're somebody that likes to use it in wireless mode, connected to Bluetooth, you're going to have to deal with that. And it's something that I've found very annoying and is definitely a drawback for this keyboard compared to many others that connect much more quickly. So the last thing to talk about on problems and concerns is sort of the double-edged sword, the other side of the availability, the price, the various options, etc. And that's that these are really often out of stock. And for Keychron, they have the ability to have you sign up to get notified when something comes back into availability. But every time I look at their website, there's usually only a few select options available. When I go onto Amazon, they're much more readily available, but that brings in a whole different challenge in that on Amazon, it's really tough to make sure that you have the right one. The names of these products is just a wall of text listing out all these different options that I've said about backlighting and key types and hot swappable and all of these different terms. And each one seems to be a separate listing. You want to make sure that you definitely are focused in reading each one of those to make sure that you're ordering the keyboard that you're looking for. And you're probably going to wind up having to go through somebody like Amazon since the availability directly from Keychron is usually limited. So that's the last thing to think about, is that if you love this keyboard and you want to get one, you might have to wait a little bit until the availability is sorted out for the specific version, the specific model that you're looking for. So that wraps up all the things that are concerning to me, despite the fact that some of them are usability based and make the keyboard a little bit less user-friendly to the way that I operate it. All in all, I think this is still a really solid keyboard, and I want to focus on who this keyboard is for. So the Keychron K3 and really the entire line of slim mechanical keyboards, I think is for somebody looking to enter the slim mechanical space, but who's looking for the cheap option, who wants to not overpay, but also doesn't want to sacrifice any of the big features that all of the competitors have. And it's also perfect if somebody's looking for the absolute slimmest, smallest, tiniest little mechanical keyboard you can get, because I don't think you're going to find something smaller than this, at least not on the market today. So if those are the things that you're looking for and you're willing to deal with potentially a little bit of reconnection delay if you're using it wirelessly, this is a really good keyboard for you and something you should consider. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.